I will not be dancing today. So today I'm going to preach over Ecclesiastes 1. If you'd stand with me, if you're able, I'm going to read Ecclesiastes 1 and then get into our sermon. This is the word of God from Ecclesiastes 1. All is vanity. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What does man gain by the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south, goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the winds return. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, "See, this is new"? It has already been done, it has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of the former things, nor will there be any remembrance of the later things yet to be among those who come after. The vanity of wisdom. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I apply my heart to seek and search out by wisdom all that is done under heaven. It is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom, surpassing all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my heart has had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceived that this also is but striving after the wind. For in much wisdom, much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. This is the word God has for us, and it is eternally true. You may be seated. So, Ecclesiastes. Not sure. Besides me sitting underneath the night sky in Western Kenya, I was originally going to preach over John 3 and our need for the cross and what Christ did on it. But as I was sitting there reading Ecclesiastes 1, after witnessing what toil these African people were doing, I was just felt pulled to talk over it. So not going to be a real long talk since I only had a couple weeks to prepare. But so vanity, of course, is the theme of chapter 1 as we read through it. In Africa, some seem to be working even towards vanity, though. You know, you saw the farmer sitting there with his one pick, toiling over these weeds, the entire trip. So when we look at the Hebrew term, Hebel, I think that's how you pronounce it, translates to vanity, which is vain, right? So that's what Solomon, which in this sermon, there's debate over if King Solomon was the author of this. I'm just going to refer to him as preacher or Solomon. Not a big deal. It's probably about Solomon, even if it wasn't his direct writing. So you can think of that Hebrew word Hebel translated to mist or vapor or just a mere breath. So thinking when he says vanity, not just like, oh, someone's vain, but going after something that you just can't grab and hold on to, right? Like mist is there and then it's gone, right? The wind blows, the mist is gone. I think back to looking at Crater Lake when we were in Oregon a few years ago, and beautiful lake, and then all of a sudden the mist would come in and cover it up, and then 5 minutes later it was completely gone. Very elusive or fleeting. So as I said, I'll refer to Solomon or the preacher. Some people are disputing that, of course. He was a wise ruler, right? One of the wisest of his time, or the wisest, according to him. So he kind of had a midlife crisis as you read through Ecclesiastes 1, right? Like he said, what do you say here? He experienced wisdom and knowledge, and I applied my heart to wisdom and knowledge, to know madness and folly, right? In chapter 2, I'll read that too here in a little bit. He basically had what we would consider today a midlife crisis as he was going through it. So in chapter 2, he says, "And whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun." So thinking through this whole chapter, I think it's helpful to remember that even Solomon, or the preacher, as I'll refer to him here, is looking at life reminded that it applies to the reality of living in a fallen world. If we don't look at this from that perspective, it's going to, you can see the anger and the frustration and the sorrow that he's going through in this, and we can get caught up in that without realizing he's talking about the fallen world. And even he admits at the end there, this is incomprehensible. He still does not understand everything, but shows a quest to try to figure it out, which is what we are all hopefully on. So there's two things I want to make sure we see in this text. First one is we will toil all of our lives. We're going to toil. And the second one is what really matters is why we toil. Why are we toiling? So the people in the rural area where we stayed in Africa, most of the time they were constantly tilling the soil. I mean, we were there 2 weeks and I saw weeds grow like 3 feet because it's just constantly raining, constantly sunny. They have no, winter realistically there. So every 2 to 4 months, their crops are rotating in. So they're constantly toiling, constantly planting. They don't have Walmart down the street. So whatever they're planting in 2 to 4 months is going to be on their table or their neighbor's table. So they have no tractors, no GPS guided planters, right? This made me ponder verse 3 from Genesis 3:17 after I was reading in Ecclesiastes 1 and remembered the curse on the ground because of Adam's original sin is the pain you shall eat all of the days of our life. It says in Genesis 3:17. And at that point, I felt a little bit of guilt, right? Thinking, man, we just got it so good. I just want to come help and do everything I can. If I want maize, I go to the store. I get maize. If I put up a garden, Lord willing, it doesn't have 2-inch hail or I don't forget to water it, it might save me some money, but I don't have to have a garden. We've got chickens that I still can't pencil out a profit on, but they're fun. This is our toil, right? We still toil here just as they are toiling there. It is just a different type of toil. So I kind of went through all those emotions and God brought me back to, yep, we're still toiling here. It just looks different than what they're toiling there. So we toil in different endeavors there, here. We toil in different ways, but the heart of our toil is what the preacher is alluding to here in chapter 1. And if you continue to read through it, it is very evident and preparing us for later chapters. So a few things to ponder. So I'd encourage anybody to just read through chapter 1 and sit there, gaze up at the sky tonight or sometime this week, and ponder these questions. Generations come and go. The sun always rises. It always sets. The wind blows and blows, and somehow it gets nowhere. The sea is full but not overflowing, even though the rivers constantly flow into it. Our eyes are not satisfied with seeing. Our ear is not filled with hearing. There is nothing new under the sun. I've prayed, pondered these for the last 2 weeks, and it usually brings up more unanswered questions. So we can see in chapter 1, it's very mundane, right? It's repetitive. He's saying the same thing with many different examples, but it's always going to be there. A guy putting a roof on a mud hut in Africa with grass 1,000 years ago is no different than the guy putting an asphalt roof on a house today in Nebraska in our backyard. They might have fancier tools, but it's still work. It's still toil. They still use grass in Africa too, not just asphalt. Mostly tin for all my construction folks out there. So Solomon, as one author puts it that I was reading through, is like an overcritical building inspector in verses 4 through 11 when he's talking about this. Most of my tradesmen will understand what that's like when you have an overcritical inspector. Similar analogy would be a boss that can't accept the job that you've done. It's constantly nitpicking. Won't get to the point what I call of Gitmo or good enough to move on. Like, hey, we've done the job, now let's move on. That nitpicking, which is what Solomon's doing here in verse 4 through 11. And I think it correlates really well with the rich fool out of Luke. So I'm going to read through that here quick too. So it starts in verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you?" And he then said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist on the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of the rich man produced plentiful. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down all my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is the one who lays up treasure for himself and not the rich toward God.'" So this parable illustrates what Solomon is sorrowful of. What are you toiling over? Is it toiling to serve God or serve our own self-interests? There's a few questions we could ask ourselves. Are we complacent? Are we relying on our self-sufficiency, or are we relying on God? Are we coveting our treasures here on earth that we're building up? Or are we storing them up to give them to God? I'm reminded of an example I use a lot at work, Robert G. Letourneau. I don't know if anybody of the older generation might remember him. He was a business magnate, a philanthropist, inventor who held nearly 300 patents. He was known as the Dean of Earth Moving. He was known in his days, in the early 30s, 40s, 50s, as the world's greatest inventor of earth moving and materials handling equipment. Natural genius, only a 7th grade education, but built huge machines in his lifetime. Machines designed and built by him represented nearly 70% of the earth-moving equipment and engineering vehicles used by our forces during World War II. It was a major factor in our winning World War II. He produced 10,000 carryalls, 14,000 bulldozers, 16,000 sheep rollers. Those are the rollers with the feet on them. 1,200 rooters, 1,800 turnipools, the building of roads, military bases, etc. in Europe, Africa, and Asia was the greatest dirt-moving project the world had ever seen then. It's the first totally mechanized war, too, in World War II. So you can just imagine the amount of wealth that this man accumulated in his lifetime. Avid Christian man, was saved in high school, actually thought about ministry. He gave away 90% of that wealth to God and considered God his partner. He was very famous for saying, "I try to shovel out more for God than he can for me. But he always wins. He's got a bigger shovel." So I'm not saying monetary giving is always going to grow our monetary wealth, but we are guaranteed that our work for the Lord is not forgotten, since his kingdom will last forever. And that's one of the things Solomon is worried about here in chapter 1. So the question for each of us, I believe, is what is our motive for working? What is the motive for our toil, is what Solomon is trying to get to. In verse 11, we see nothing of our work will be remembered. In one of the commentaries by O'Donnell that I've been reading, he gave a great example of nothing being remembered, right? Nothing new. John Lennon said back in '66, he wrote, "We're more popular than Jesus." And at the height of Beatlemania, Lennon made the prediction, Christianity will go. It will vanish. It will shrink. I needn't argue with that. I'm right, and I will be proved right, he said. We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. Now, I know most of the older generation will know who Lennon is, but I'll bet if you talk to the 10-year-old next to you, they have no idea who John Lennon is. So Christ is still here. Lennon is not. What does it matter that we must be known? That's a question that Solomon asks. Solomon's trying to get us to realize that the problem with needing to be known here in this day is death. It will come for all of us. And our labor's gone with it, right? All this toil, all this labor, what is it for? If it's for ourselves, it's going to disappear. So what are you to do with that time that we're granted here on earth? Will you escape from reality into something that the world is going to tell you is going to satisfy yourself? Like immersing yourself in, say, the Huskers, hunting, video gaming, just fill in the blank, right? What is that thing that you go to and just go mind numb and not think about the Lord, that takes over your reality without a thought of God? So why do you toil? When we look at chapter 1 with gospel glasses, as a couple of the authors I've been reading, I like that term. We need to view it through the gospel. We must abandon our human wisdom, which is what Solomon's talking about here in chapter 1, and think of divine wisdom and accept all the good things in this life as a gift from God. If God is eternal and we live with him in heaven, our time here under the sun, like a mist, short and dries up quickly. But life with Christ is remembered. His work on the cross is not just history. It was for all sin, past, present, and future. So if God has the eye on a sparrow, Do you think he'll remember your service to him? I do. I think he will. But not for my glory, for his kingdom. 1 Corinthians 8:3 says, if anyone loves God, he is known by God. So if God is eternal, doesn't forget anything like I do every day, do you think he'll remember your work for him? So just to wrap up with what I've been talking about, so the first question, or the first point was, we are going to toil all of our lives. And what really matters, the second point, is why we toil. We should work for the Lord because it will satisfy all the things that Solomon is lamenting, basically, in chapter 1. O'Donnell also put it better than I could. He says, even the smallest, seemingly insignificant act, such as giving a cup of cold water to a disciple, matters, if done in faith for the sake of the gospel and for the glory of God. Our labor is not in vain. Vanity of vanities. All of vanity, he says, right? True, he says, unless we work, ask to the Lord, as Paul puts it in Ephesians. And I'll call everyone here, including myself, if you don't know Christ personally or haven't renewed your commitment to him and knowing him and what joys come from working for the Lord, it's never too late. Even for that thief on the cross, he saw his sin and repented there on the cross next to Jesus. He came to faith in Christ, and what did Jesus say to him? Truly, I say to you, today you will be in paradise with me. Will your toil be remembered for Christ, or will it be gone in the next century when no one remembers you? That's my challenge to all of us today. What are we working for? What's our toil for? Let's pray.